Welcome to Classes in Session, presented by UI Health. I'm Doug Glanville. At graduation, it is a time to celebrate. Years of hard work with a diploma finally in hand. But it's also a time to exhale. A long road has taken you to a fork in the road, and despite the area of study in which you are now qualified, it is not clear where you're going next. For athletes, this presents a unique challenge because they have a skill set that can no longer be used at the collegiate level. They may reach this turning point and not see the paved road they had planned on for a lifetime. Today, we will discuss commencement. Graduation from college is just the beginning. We bring in Prim Siripipat, journalist and host of The Next Chapter, a show where she engages athletes in their stories of transition and life after sports. She's in the process of getting her PhD in counseling psychology from Fordham University. We will also be joined by J.A. Adande, longtime sports writer who has covered a wide range of topics on sports on and off the field. He is also the director of sports journalism at the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern University. Let's get to class. Every May, the vast majority of colleges and universities will have a graduation ceremony. From coast to coast, caps will fly in the air, and speakers will inspire students to embrace their roles as our future leaders. The commencement address will mark a new beginning, as these speakers from every industry and influencer list will share what is necessary to enter a new frontier of opportunity. In the back of every student's mind will be that nagging question around if the institution from which they are leaving has prepared them for what is next. Well, what is next? For many, they will continue on in the area of study that is written on their diploma. It could include more schooling, but many will attempt to enter the workforce in their field of choice, entering a wide range of workplaces that include everything from corporate spaces to charitable organizations. And then there are the athletes. Those that have had professional aspirations to play at the next level will find themselves in a quandary. Less than 2% of these top collegiate athletes will have a chance to play professionally, but that number hardly reflects the number that hope to continue their athletic career. The average student owes money at graduation, roughly $30,000. This puts pressure on a student athlete to come to peace with the requirement to make a radical departure from their past 4 years as a collegiate athlete. Even though at graduation they are fairly young, most have the unique challenge of retiring by default. A press conference that no one is attending with a person at the podium who is not ready to speak. It is a form of silent suffering, compelling a young person to face a truth at an age where their bodies are still able, still capable. Most do not reach their peak athletic performance for years after graduation. Yet so many have nowhere to play, at least not at the level they expected to be after 4 years of commitment. Yet that athletic commitment can translate well to the workplace. According to NCAA researcher Tom Pascas, 90% of these student athletes believe that their experience in athletics helped them develop leadership skills and improve their work ethics. But can another field match the adrenaline rush of playing in the Final Four? It is said, quote, "These college years are the best years of your life," which already creates a negative stance for what could come next. It has to be about more than taxes and insurance, debt and sleep-deprived parenthood, corporate numbness, and hair loss. It comes down to that perception, making the importance of finding resources and supporters to help these student athletes find their future. After years of a strict and disciplined organizational structure to guide their out-of-classroom time, most are at a loss or at least feeling that loss. They want something that still inspires them to achieve and to contribute to something bigger than self. The life of an athlete is finite, even for those that soar in rarefied air for longer than most. It ends, and it forces a painful new beginning that so few are ready for. All must endure through that transition, and until there is empowerment to shift that focus from who you no longer can be to who you can become, it will be a hard road, but at least there is a road. Very excited to welcome in the next two guests for Classes in Session. And this time we're talking about commencement, the idea that when you graduate from a higher institution of higher learning, you're starting something. And although we think about throwing our caps in the air or celebrating, there's also a beginning happening. So first, let's talk to Prim Siripipat, who is the host of The Next Chapter, a multimedia journalist who studied all things sports, currently a PhD student at Fordham University, and was an athlete in tennis at Duke University. So welcome, Prim.
Hi, thank you for having me. So excited to be here.
And we also have J.A. Adande, longtime friend. NBA is his specialty, but he's covered all things sports on and off the field, and currently the director of sports journalism at Northwestern University. So welcome, J.A.
Thank you. Hi, Doug and Prim.
All right, so I think we have the perfect team here to discuss commencement and the new beginning that happens once they're leaving the college ranks into the new world. But I want to focus specifically on athletes. And so, Prim, I want to start with you about just defining what commencement means through that lens.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I can't help define this without interjecting my own personal experience with it. And when I think about commencement, it kind of goes in two different directions. On one hand, I feel like it's game time, whether you're leaving sport or whether you're going to the professional level. And then on the other side of it, I also feel like it's just the end of this beautiful chapter of one's life. And for a lot of college athletes, that means it's the end of their athletic career. And even for some of the athletes that want to play at the elite level, it's also the end of a period where there's just like this sense of innocence with sport. Having talked to dozens of athletes, even those that played at the professional ranks, so many of them talk about the college level and just how fun that experience was. And there's just something very different when you go on to the next level.
Yeah, and Jay, you've seen this not only as a student at Northwestern as well, but also now in the role as a director for the institution at Northwestern. So what is commencement? At least what does it mean to you? And then how has it sort of shaped over the years in your new role?
Well, one thing that's exciting about my role is I get to participate in these ceremonies every year now. And you think about it, most of our ceremonies are rite of passages, have a religious connection, weddings, funerals, bar mitzvahs, baptisms. This is one that's really secular, that's a part of our society, that everyone, regardless of your background, participates in. And something that really occurred to me at my own graduation, again, 30 years ago, was that we think of it as being for the recipient of the diploma. But it dawned on me that day that this is really a moment for the parents, and they deserve that opportunity after all that they've invested in their children. They deserve that opportunity to see them walk across the stage and get that diploma.
Well, and Jay, I'm glad you mentioned that because I was playing professional baseball after my junior year, and my senior year I was already playing. So I was debating on going back for graduation in May. I was in the middle of a season. And of course I was like, I have to go. And I remember the team kind of saying, well, you don't have to go, whatever. And I was like, no, I got to get on this plane. And to your point, my parents had waited a long time. So I appreciate that point. Now, Prim, you work with your podcast, you have something that is very valuable called The Next Chapter, because you explore what is next in athletics. What have you learned about sort of the nature of sort of what is a beginning and the fact that there seems to be multiple beginnings? What does that show sort of taught you?
Yeah, the beginning of something is essentially equates to a transition. And when we have to start something new, it often means having to let go of something. So if we were to whittle this experience down, for example, for athletes who are beginning a new vocation and graduating from college, they essentially have to say goodbye to this old chapter, to this athletic identity, and something that really has served so many different purposes. But I think oftentimes what we forget about is the emotional experience that's going to come with this. And for athletes, I would say almost across the board, nearly every single athlete will always talk about some sort of loss, a loss in identity, a loss in relationship, a loss in structure, a loss in scheduling, a loss in, a sense of community. So when you talk about like these new beginnings, to me, it always goes back to how difficult it is for a lot of these athletes just to shed this other part of them, because, as they reintegrate back into the real world, a lot of them are just kind of left with thinking like, well, who am I now?
We continue with J.A. Adande and Prim Siripipat and discuss what is a bust and how defining an athlete's successes or failures affect them in their lives. Next on Classes in Session with Doug Glanville, presented by UI Health. Welcome back to Classes in Session with Doug Glanville, presented by UI Health, as we continue with J.A. Adande and Prim Siripipat. We talked about loss, but we talk about, you raised the issue about searching. You're looking for something. And so, Prim, I'm curious to know the support you think would be really valuable to these athletes. Is there a through line or a consistency? You'd say, yeah, if we could provide X to these athletes, this would really be an asset.
Yeah, support. I think social support would probably be the one thing that's definitely necessary in providing some sort of resources for athletes. But I think the support has to come in so many different forms. I think on one hand, there needs to be counseling support, not necessarily from a mental health perspective, but from a vocational perspective, and beginning the process much earlier rather than starting when they're juniors or seniors, putting it in their ear about like, hey, sport is going to end. What would you like to do after this period ends? And who are you beyond sport? And also, I think there has to be a sense of community beyond their team and their athletic structure, because I think a lot of times for athletes, and this was for me too, I didn't really do a great job when I was at Duke of kind of expanding my circles. I was involved in multiple things, but I was so focused and I was so young and immature and just heavily focused on athletics. And I think there needs to be, greater efforts to try to expand their identities and really get them involved in different things.
Jay, you've seen that from the Northwestern perspective as student, but also now as director. Is there any distinction you make between those needs from someone who is an athlete versus like the non-athletes? Do you see any distinction or something unique that their support requires something different?
In some ways, it's similar, at least from my own experience. I wasn't playing sports, but I was dedicated to my craft. And for me, that required being at the daily Northwestern offices through all hours of the night. We'd be there till 2, 3 in the morning, putting the paper to bed, as they say in the parlance of the field. And, I didn't really do a whole lot of the college experience. It was work. So I think I can relate to what Prim talked about, just that lack of expanding, that lack of going beyond your prescribed routes to get to the path. But, again, I was very focused. The reason I went to Northwestern was a very specific reason. And looking back, I'm glad because, I really enjoyed my 20s, and to stick to the theme of commencement, it really is the beginning. And college shouldn't be the best 4 years of your life. If the college years were the best time of your life, you're doing life wrong, because it gets a lot better once you're out there. There's specific great memories in college. There are certain liberties that you're afforded to have while you're in college. But to me, I look at my post-college life as being much better than my college life. And I think that's a healthy way to go about it.
That's funny. I feel like my high school days were fantastic, so I'm not really sure what that says about my trajectory, but that's for another show.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Jay, because you echo some of the words I always lead into the show, and I talk about. You hear that a lot, right? The best years of your life, and you're setting up people to feel like you're going downhill.
Doug, I want to go back to a word that you used, downhill, and that actually can be a good thing. I use this analogy a lot. When done properly, college can be like the first thing on a roller coaster. When you get on a roller coaster, what's the first thing you do? You climb the hill, right? They accelerate you up to the high point, and then the rest of the ride is all gravity doing the work, right? These roller coasters aren't motorized. They depend on gravity to take you down all the hills and through the loops and things like that.
How important is it, even for the athlete, to see how you frame those words in and of itself, right? Success and failure. And one thing I was looking into, we talked about being a bust, right? How much does it matter about how you define success and failure, ways to frame these terms?
Yeah, I think if you would have asked Prim, the former ESPN journalist, I think my answer would have been a lot different. But for somebody now who is trying to approach sports from a more humanistic lens. I think that, when we label athletes, I think we have to be really careful about oversimplifying the sport experience and their story. The danger of that is to whittle their narrative down really leaves out a lot of other things that are important, that provides much more context about their situation. So if you talk about Greg Oden, the reason why it became a different conversation is because I was able to ask him about his childhood, about all his other athletic experiences, the support and also the lack of support that he did not get as a former number 1 overall pick, what happened with the Portland Trailblazers, what happened with his 7 surgeries. I think the responsibility for us is to make sure that we're talking about all the factors that are contributing to their situation, if that makes sense.
All right, I want to hear from you. It's your turn to give the commencement address. What advice would you give to the class of 2022? Tweet me your responses using the hashtag #ClassesInSession, and we'll share some of your answers on our next show. We'll be right back on Classes in Session with Doug Glanville, presented by UI Health. Welcome back to Classes in Session with Doug Glanville, presented by UI Health. I think in my book, I wrote something about, baseball and saying there's a moment where you realize that you're no longer chasing the dream. You're actually running from a nightmare. And it's sort of that, I'm hanging on and I don't even know why, my hamstring's gone and, but I'm like, I don't know what else I'm going to do kind of feeling. So, but I think the way you framed it, or at least how I read it was, you asked the question, when does pursuing a dream actually hurt you? So have you found any sort of insights as to timing of this, right? Does it make a difference that you played until your knee fell off or that you were kind of calling the shots in a different way?
It's such a great question. And I wish I had the answer to that, because I think the complexity behind that answer is it's case by case basis, and only the athlete really knows. But I think what is really important is being able to balance the realistic and objective view with the subjective and emotional experience, and being able to meld those two worlds, if that makes any sort of sense, I think is the most difficult thing. Because I just talking to Andy Roddick, he preferred to have gone out on top. He didn't want to be one of those athletes that was hanging on for dear life and kind of doing the slow fade out. Whereas there are so many other athletes who want to be holding on for 1, 5, 10 years and doing the slow fade out. So I think it's a very personal experience.
I would say sometimes it's about learning to go beyond the dream, and in my case, I achieved my dream. I just wanted to cover a Laker game, and I got to do that as a 20-year-old intern at the San Bernardino Sun. And it was actually depressing because I felt like I had achieved everything at age 20 that I sought out for the last 8 years or so. And so now what? And it turned out that actually the now what was a whole lot better than I ever thought. And I wound up getting my dream job at the LA Times as a sports columnist. That was all I ever wanted to do. And guess what? I left that for a job that was even better, that I never could have imagined when I was in high school. And that was a chance to be at ESPN and covering the NBA for ESPN. So sometimes there's a world beyond your dreams. And in rare cases for athletes, there's a world of greater success and renown and even financial reward after your career.
I think it would be the theme similar to what J.A. has been talking about, is really reframing it and talking about opportunity. The opportunity lies ahead. And I would tell anybody, whether it's an athlete or non-athlete, that this is your story and the mighty pen is in your hands. You are the author of your story, and it's up to you what you would like. I think the thing that oftentimes scares a lot of graduating students is that it might feel like this is kind of a safe bubble, right? You get to go to class, it's very structured, you have this built-in support, and now it's really game time. You are off and running into the real world. You got to get a job. You're going to have to be financially dependent. It can be really scary. And I've seen some students and even athletes kind of do this self-sabotaging process, because it can be that scary where people are really avoiding this transition.
Well, and J.A., you have year in, year out, you probably have very specific speeches you've heard. Do you remember any points that resonated really well in what you've heard over the years? Yeah,
there's one, and it sort of ties into some of the things we were talking about. So my first year teaching at USC as an adjunct professor, Neil Armstrong gave the overall graduation speech at USC. And the thing that stuck with me was, he said, you can make a lot of money and you can lose all that. And a lot of people probably lost money in the stock market recently. You can lose your health, right? No matter how much you do to maintain your health, there are things beyond your control that can cause you to lose your health, and we all will eventually lose our lives. He said the only thing that can't be taken from you, without your consent is your values. Your values and your approach. So as long as you stay true to your values and who you are and what you want to represent and what you want to espouse, you can never lose that.
Well, Prim and J.A., I really want to thank you for your time and your insights on a challenging topic that many athletes who are transitioning from life in sport to life after the sport are trying to navigate things that, we're trying to come to more understanding about. And the patience it takes is reflected in your work and how you help us shape what we're coming to understand about these athletes and their stories. So I appreciate your great work and your time here in Classes in Session, and I look forward to further conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
It is clear that the forces that move us forward into our next chapter need to also look backwards. That with the desire to turn the page to something new, we are also losing something important. Athletes feel this in a special way because no matter how high you reach in your sport, there is an ending, one that is often written for you in the handwriting of declining health or declining performance. Yet athletes also have the power to define terms like success and failure differently. That commencement not only means a beginning, but a recognition of the path that brought you there in the first place. But given time, one can learn to define oneself with the uniform off. As Prim stated so well, maybe the best commencement address is given through a word, opportunity. It is simply a chance, a door that is open. And Neil Armstrong's commencement address at USC when J.A. was an adjunct professor brings it home. You may not have control of many things in your life, but your values endure all of the time if you fight for them. Success can therefore be a permanent state if you see it as a measure of how true you stay to what you value in life. I'm Doug Glanville. See you next time.